There are some things you can do in the purchase agreement, Peter, to, I don't know, not get rid of the fear of this appraisal issue, which is what we're talking about. It's also a liquidity issue, right? If you don't have the financing or the cash available, then you're not as liquid of a consumer as well. So a seller is going to understand that. But some of the ways we can overcome that, for example, is, and I'm not making any advice right here, I'm speaking generally at some of the ways we can avoid that, is maybe we're waiving an inspection. And so now we're removing one of the contingencies that many consumers will have. And so maybe a seller would be more apt to accept the lesser qualified financing because they're removing the inspection contingency. And in Minnesota, you can cancel for any reason during the inspection. And so that's a really big deal. Maybe we could make the earnest money non-refundable. That's something, maybe we're doing that after inspection or we're doing a combination of both. In those instances, it's really interesting. I've had a client not all that long ago. We wrote a $5,000 earnest money check to the seller directly. And, we put the property address in there. But when I presented the offer to the realtor, I said, your seller could go buy an ATV like today. They literally could go spend this $5,000 today because it's their money to keep. It's a non-refundable earnest money check. So just imagine that you're a seller and you can go buy an ATV today if you accept offer A, and you can spend that money however you want. Or you have to wait till closing to access some of that money. So there are ways to kind of overcome it. We have to have the willingness to take some of these larger risks and, of course, be very qualified, have a very good mortgage broker like you so that we know that they're pre-qualified and they're going to obtain that mortgage on their own kind of bearings. But there are some ways to overcome some of these things.
Let's say I'm a buyer kind of in the mid-range of all these. I'm conventional financing, but I'm minimum down. I don't need seller paid costs, but I don't have a 50% down payment. Is there even any reason for me to make an offer if I hear that, somebody's offering cash? Am I automatically losing that situation?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Financing is one term in the purchase agreement. I believe there might be a little more than this now, but I remember about 5 years ago, I actually counted the negotiation items. There's like 37 items you can negotiate in a purchase agreement. That was a few years ago. It's probably slightly more today. And so financing is one term, and then you have 36 other terms to negotiate. And then you can get really creative too. I just had an offer come across one of my listings, and it's an estate sale. And this home it's vacant, but it has furniture and stuff in there, right? Lots of furniture, actually, dishes and everything. It was a previously owner-occupied property like a couple of weeks ago, and now the owner is no longer living there. And we had an offer come across that said, you don't have to remove anything from the property. We'll take care of all of that. That's a pretty nice perk for this particular seller who no longer lives at the home. They're not going to keep any of the stuff that they have there. And so the buyer's like, well, we'll take care of that for you. So there's things like that you can do to overcome some of these other challenges with financing.
Yeah. So that really comes down to the type of realtor that you're working with as a buyer actually means something, right? I mean, I know that when buyers are working with you or your team, I just see more commonly buyers walking away with an accepted offer. I think if it's just a matter of, hey, make an offer on this house without guidance, that might work, but it's improved by dealing with the kind of experience and expertise that you're just bringing up. Because I hadn't thought of that, but that's in obviously that doesn't work in every scenario, but if you're really analyzing the property and analyzing the sellers, what can I do to stand out as a buyer and kind of improve my offer? It might not all come down to price, right? It might come down to some other stuff.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think price is by far the most important aspect in a seller's mind. That's at least where they start the conversation, right? The seller's always going to say, how much is the offer? And so we have to start there. And then I always, when I'm presenting to a seller, it's like, let's look at the price, let's look at the financing, and then let's look at the contingencies, and let's discuss each one and figure out which one's better or worse. Now, if I can use this specific example, the other day we had 3 offers. 2 of them were above asking price, and they actually were the exact same price. And then another one was below the asking price. And the financing was all similar. And so very easily the seller was like, oh, well, let's not even talk about that third offer. It's below the price and the financing similar. I don't really care about anything else then. They just were unwilling to even look at it. Realtor wrote in that the buyer could address an appraisal that came in lower by like $20,000 or something like that. It was like a pretty good term in the purchase agreement. And the seller was like, well, it doesn't really matter because it's below our asking price. We feel confident that's going to appraise for at least the asking price, which I agreed. So then we just pushed that offer aside and we looked at the other 2. And then we went line by line. We looked at the inspection. One was a 3-day, one was a 7-day. Again, this isn't universally true, but if you write an offer as a buyer where the seller can just sign it and they don't have to counter any of the other terms, you're more likely to get it accepted. So for example, the 3-day inspection contingency it's substantially better than 7 days. And again, it's because a buyer could cancel for any reason in that time frame. So why would you as a seller allow someone 4 extra days to cancel for any reason? You wouldn't. You just wouldn't do it. If the price is the same and that's the only other term, you'd accept that one. So that was a really big deal. And then we went on to what the other contingencies were. One of them had that concern about the personal property. So yeah, again, it's just when we're talking with our buyers, it's like, okay, let's first talk about price. What are you comfortable with? And I always ask this question, Peter. I say, so you're willing to offer $355. What if somebody offered $356? Would you be mad at me or yourself if you didn't offer $357? And many times people are like, no, like, 355 is my highest. But sometimes they're like, well, yeah, I'd pay 357. It's like, look, we need to write an offer when you're competing. That's the most that you would pay to where the seller, number one, they don't have to counter. And number 2, that if they didn't accept your offer, you're like, I wouldn't pay a penny more anyways. So we start with price and then we move to contingencies.
While you're on that topic, I just want to mention something that is a constant level of discussion that when buyers are talking to you about price and you say, well, let's add $1,000 to the purchase price, and buyers hem and haw and kick the dirt and, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can afford that. In general, that extra 1,000 will cost them about $6 a month. And what I encourage my buyers is to think of that. And if they don't know what that payment factor is, either ask you for it or ask me for it, so that you can really boil it down to say, is it worth it? If Travis calls me back and says I didn't get the house, was saving the $6 a month, worthwhile? And, we don't know that answer, right? But I want to throw that out because it's a question that everybody is amazed at. It just doesn't mean much in terms of payment.
Yeah, and $1,000 is $1,000 when you go to sell the home, right? And so, but you're absolutely right. From a monthly payment perspective, it's extremely low cost. Now, I never want my buyers to overpay for real estate. And the market's shifting right now, right, Peter? And so we're definitely still in a seller's market. I mean, the fact that I have 3 offers on a $350,000 home in Egan, and it's like a small rambler and stuff like this. I mean, it's not common over the course of my career that I would have 3 offers on a home like this. So it's still a seller's market, but it's definitely shifting. And so I think competitive offers are going to be more likely on the homes that are of much higher demand. And then usually those homes are probably priced so competitively that there's room to pay more, right? So we don't want you to overpay for a home. So we would do enough research to give you a range of value that might, that you can determine where you want your offer to be. And then I will be very frank with my clients. I'll say, like, in this instance, the most expensive home in this price range was $475. And so you might be able to pay a couple percent more than that, maybe up to $480 or something like that. But if you're paying more than $480, you're overpaying for the home. And I give my exact opinion on that. And I think that's helpful too, because then the client's like, well, If somebody were to pay more than 480, I'm okay not getting the house. And sometimes it is acceptable not to get the home. And we went in like 2022, for example, there were people writing offers for more than homes were worth, for sure. But I don't think that's common. I actually think that usually the home is priced maybe more competitively than it needs to be to create the demand, to create the extra offers. And then you just have to figure out how much more than the asking price is the home actually worth.
Well, Travis, we've covered a lot in this video. Is there anything else that you see that would be valuable to add?
Yeah, we did cover a lot in this video. I think it's always case by case, Peter. And so every home has a different need. The seller themselves have a different need. The buyers have different needs. And we have to try to figure out in a competing offer, how can I make your offer look as good as it can look for you and that it's acceptable to a seller? And if it gets accepted, then perfect. But if it doesn't get accepted, then that should be okay for everyone. It should be okay for us. I mean, it's a bummer to lose out on that offer. But at the end of the day, if we've written the best offer we can write and we've written it as competitively as we could, and if the seller chooses someone else, then let's go find the next best house. So it's very case by case. I think that's probably the only thing I would say here. But high level, it's price, it's financing, and then contingencies.
I really appreciate you walking through that with us today, Travis. You know, competitive offers are a fact of life. And if you go into that offer situation with the correct mindset of how do I make my offer look the best, you stand a better chance than just throwing out a number. And like you said, there's 37, 38 different points that you really can consider about improving your offer a little bit. And sometimes it's costing you nothing. Sometimes it just means you're working faster on your financing or what have you. But I really appreciate you taking the time because I think you may have helped some buyers figure out how to get their offer accepted where it otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I appreciate it as well. Your advice on the closing costs, again, every time you and I talk about closing costs, it seems like you throw out another like way to describe it that's going to help me with my clients. And in this instance, you said it's your cost. We have to figure out how to pay for it. I mean, that's a great piece of language there too. So I appreciate you, sir.